Hey everyone, it's Alexei Uzas here from Exile Accelerator. In this video, I'm going to give you 10 reasons why you're not financing your feature film. Before I get started, I want to let you know that spots are available for our Producing Accelerator program that helps filmmakers like you finance and produce your films consistently. So if that's something that you're interested in, stick around until the end of this video, and I'm going to give you some more details about how you can get in touch with us and see if you're the right fit for that program. Now, as always, if you do like this content, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to be notified when we post a video. All right, so let's dive into it. Number one is that you are making short films. So if you're just starting out in your film career, if you've just left film school or university, or even if you're at those places, it's likely that you're working on short films. Similarly, if you're entering the film industry a bit later in life, then it's likely that the first step that you're going to take is to make short films, right? It's a great way to hone your craft. It's a great way to kind of dip your toes in and test things on a smaller scale before you move on to a larger project. It's also much easier to finance because the budgets are much smaller. So it is a great way to get started. So the first reason that you're likely not making features is that you're focusing on short films. But what's important to note is that there is a point where making shorts just for the sake of it is likely actually just becoming something that you're doing because you don't know how to make a feature film, or you're a bit intimidated by making a feature film. So what I think is that really, once you've made 2 to 3 short films, that's really enough for you to then take the leap into making feature films. I think if you're spending much longer making short films, then it can turn into a situation where you are making them just for the sake of making them, or you're making them because you don't know how to take that next step, or that you're afraid to. And so if you are in that position, I highly recommend that you start thinking about making that longer form project and moving on to making a feature film. The next reason is that you may not have actually settled on an idea for your feature film. So you might have made all the short films that you want to make and made the decision that you want to make a feature film, and so now you're ready to do so. But it's likely that you have a bunch of different ideas floating around and you're not quite sure which one you want to hone in on. So if that's you, the best advice that I can give you is to have a look at all the projects in front of you and think about, firstly, which one is going to be the most achievable for you to finance and produce. And the best way to determine that is to look at basically the resources that you have right now and the resources that you're going to be able to attain by the time you want to make the film. And that should give you a rough idea about what the budget for the film is going to be. And the budget for the film can often help you decide on which idea is the right idea for you to pursue. The other important factor to take into account is which of those projects are you actually the most passionate about? And which of those do you believe is going to have the most reward for you if you're able to get the film into production? So this is really important for 2 reasons. The first is it's important to be extremely passionate about the film that you want to make, because making that first film is difficult. There are a bunch of obstacles and hurdles that you're going to have to overcome. So making sure that it's a film that you're passionate about to begin with is important, because it makes it possible for you to break through those barriers. And it makes it much easier to do that because it's a film that you're really passionate about and you care about. And then making sure it's a film that is going to have the best potential reward for you, I think commercially and critically, is important, because that first film is essentially still that calling card for you. You know, making that first film, you know, might not get into a major festival and become, you know, a film that lands a huge deal at Sundance or something like that. But it's important that it does get you to that next stage, right? It's a film that does receive some critical acclaim or does receive some commercial success, because that then gives you, or it starts to build that track record for you, and it makes it easy to get that second film into production. So when you're looking at all the projects and you're deciding which one you should launch into, those are the three factors that I would consider. The next reason that you're likely not raising finance on your feature is that you've created a budget instead of a finance plan. So this is a trap that I think about 90, maybe even 95, maybe even more filmmakers fall into. So you could have finished making short films, you've decided on the idea, you've even written a script, and now you've gone away and you've created a budget for the film. But what you haven't done is created a finance plan. And often what happens when people create a budget is that they send it to a line producer, and a line producer knocks up a budget. But the line producer is often not creating that budget with any reference to how the film is going to be financed or how much finance there actually is available. And if you haven't sent it to a line producer and you're just doing it yourself, it's likely that you've made that same mistake, right? So you've created a budget just looking at those hard costs and not really thinking about how much finance is actually going to be available. So this is really one of the first stumbling blocks that most people fall into, and it creates a real barrier to financing your feature film. Because if you have created a budget with no reference to the finance plan, usually what's going to happen is that budget is going to be way higher than it should be in terms of a finance plan that's achievable for you. And it's also created a situation where you're not actually examining the financial side of the project, you're only looking at the hard costs. And so you're not entering the next phase of the production process, which is finance. So after development, you're moving to financing, but you're entering that phase of the production process with the wrong mentality and with the wrong starting position. So you have to be going into that stage really thinking about the finance, about thinking about how you're going to structure the finance for a film, about what level of finance you're going to likely be able to raise for that type of project, so that you can then start to work on a budget and really craft that budget and the finance plan at the same time. The next reason is that you likely don't actually know what a finance plan is. So when I ask filmmakers what is their finance plan or what does their finance plan look like, they often give me like their grand strategy or their game plan, or they give me a rundown of how they're going to try and reach private investors or try and raise finance. And actually none of those things are a finance plan. A finance plan is a document that outlines the various elements of finance that are going to make up the production budget. It's essentially a spreadsheet that tells you how much finance you're going to raise from different sources of finance. So that could be tax credits, distribution advances, grants, private investment. And it gives you a dollar figure for each of those. And the total of those equals the budget for the film. So if you don't have a finance plan for your film, then, or if you're mistaking a finance plan for some sort of grand strategy or some sort of strategy around how you're going to raise private finance, then I can tell you now that the chance of you actually raising finance for your film is extremely low, because a finance plan is one of the fundamentals to being able to finance your feature film. So if you don't have a finance plan, you really need to think about getting one. You need to think about acquiring the knowledge about how you're going to get one, how you're going to create one. And then once you've understood the basics of a finance plan and how it works, you then need to understand the details of how the different sources of finance work. And then you need to be able to assess how much of each of those sources you're going to be able to bring into your project. So it's not enough to just understand that distribution advances are something that go into a finance plan. You need to know how to assess and how to determine what level of finance is going to be likely for you to attain for distribution advances for your particular project. So as you can see, there's a lot involved with a finance plan, but if you don't know what a finance plan is, if you don't know how to create one, then it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to raise finance for your film. The next reason, and this reason flows on from the last, but if you don't have a finance plan, then you actually don't know how much private investment you need to raise. So just because your budget is, let's say, $1 million, and I'm just using that as a completely round number, it doesn't mean that you need to raise $1 million privately. There are all these other sources of finance that you could bring into the finance structure on the finance plan to bring down the amount of private investment that you actually need to raise. So again, if you don't have a finance plan, well, you don't know how much private investment you need to raise. And if you don't know how much private investment you need to raise, you can't then accurately calculate projections, because even if you can determine the revenue, if you don't know how much you're raising privately, then you don't know what the potential ROI is. And so it's extremely important to know how much private you need to raise so that you can put together projections, so that you can start putting together financial modeling, and of course, so that then you can go and pitch the film. But if you don't know how much private finance you need to raise, it's impossible to take the next step to actually raising private finance for your film. Okay, so let's have a quick time out here because we've still got 5 more reasons to get through. Right now, what I want you to do is head to the comments below and let me know if there are any reasons that you feel like you're not raising finance for your feature film. The next reason is that even if you know how much private investment you need to raise and you've got that finance plan and you understand the sources of finance that are going to make up your budget, you don't know how to generate private investment leads. So this could be another reason why you're not able to raise finance for your film, because even if you're able to understand the basics of film finance and you understand what the finance plan and the finance structure is going to look like, if you don't know how to then go out and raise private finance by generating private investment leads every single day, then it's extremely difficult for you to be able to raise finance for your film. And it's likely another reason why you haven't raised finance on your feature film. And this is a really crucial one because raising private finance is a numbers game. You know, you need to be reaching out to a high level of potential investors for you to land the level of finance that you need to meet your target. So the only way to reach that high level of or high number of potential investors that you're pitching to is to have a lead gen system. It's to understand how to generate leads, how to do that at scale so that you can start getting those numbers up and you can start increasing the chance of you closing private investment. The next reason why you're likely not raising finance for your feature film is that you may have the leads or you may have a network of potential investors. You might have someone that's willing to put you in touch with investors, but you don't know how to pitch and close those investors. And one of the biggest issues that you may have is that A, you don't have the right investment materials, B, you don't know how to run a pitch meeting, and C, you don't know how to close an investor and what that next stage is, or what that next step is. And so if you've got any one of those 3 things wrong, or if they're not at the level that they need to be at, this could be another reason why you're not raising finance for your feature film. So for example, if your investment material isn't up to scratch, even if it's just not presented well, if the design looks shoddy, then the chance of you raising private investment is going to decrease again. If you don't know your numbers, you know, if you've got material that you're pitching, but it doesn't really explain how an investor is going to get their money back, then again, it makes it hard for you to sell that project, to sell that idea to an investor. Next, if you're in a meeting with an investor and you don't know how to run that meeting, if you don't know what questions to ask, if you don't know how best to pitch the film, then that could be another stumbling block for you, and you just might not be able to close that investor. They may not feel confident in you because of how you're pitching that film. And then finally, if you don't know how to close the investor, if you don't know how to bring that meeting to a close and know what the next steps are, if you don't have the right legal agreements and the legal framework in place for you to close the investor and get the funds in place for you to be able to use those funds, then again, it makes it very difficult for you to be able to raise finance for your feature film. Another reason why you might not be raising finance for your feature film is that you don't know how to attach a distributor and or a sales agent to the project. So if your production budget is of a decent size where you're going to need to bring in other sources of finance to your project and that are beyond just private investment, but you don't know how to attach a distributor or a sales agent, you don't know what those companies do, or you don't know how to contact those companies, or you know how to contact them, but they're not answering you. So then you're not actually pitching them in the right way. If you don't know how to close those types of companies and you don't know what to look for in those types of agreements, then again, it makes it very difficult for you to be able to finance your feature film. So if this is something that you're not doing correctly, it's important for you to try and acquire the knowledge, acquire the skills to be able to do this, because once you've made a feature film that is, that micro budget film that you're just self-financing, or you're attaining finance from your friends and family, once you get to that next level and you're trying to raise serious budgets, bringing in finance from distribution is extremely important. Firstly, because they can actually put up money that is contributed to the finance plan. And secondly, because it gives confidence to the private investors that you're pitching that the film is actually going to get distributed, and the chance of them generating a return is actually higher than if you were just pitching the film without any distribution attached. So being able to attach distribution to your project is extremely important. And if you're not doing this and you're trying to raise a decent sized budget, then it's likely that this is one of the reasons why you're not raising finance for your feature film. The next reason is that even if you have all these elements in place, you have all the experience, all the expertise, all the skills that I've just spoken about, you might just be distracting yourself. And this is something that I've seen happen to filmmakers. They know how to pitch, or they've learned how to pitch. They understand how to find sales agents and distributors. They know what elements of finance are going to make up their finance plan. They know what an achievable budget is. They've decided on the idea that they're going to execute. But what sometimes happens is they just start distracting themselves. They go back to the project. They go back to development, right? So instead of just going out there and trying to raise finance, they go back to screenwriting, and they lose months where they could have been out there trying to raise finance and developing the project, but they're just developing the project. Another thing is they try and jump or leapfrog from development into pre-production, right? So instead of focusing on financing the film, they start trying to cast the film and get locations and hiring crew and doing all those other things that actually don't even matter if you don't have the finance. Because you can go through the entirety of pre-production and get everything set up to go into production, but if you don't have the finance, it's irrelevant. So this is something that could just be it might be because the filmmaker is too intimidated by the financing stage. They might have apprehension. They might just not be able to overcome that mental barrier of going out there and asking people for money. But if those things are the case, then often what happens is that filmmakers just start distracting themselves by doing these other things. And so if you are a filmmaker who should be raising finance right now, you've got all these elements in place, you know how to do it, but you're just not doing it, right? You're not waking up each day and spending some time doing it, then you have to be asking yourself, are you actually just distracting yourself? Are you keeping yourself busy doing these other things when you're not doing what's important? And if that's the case, then it's going to be another reason why you're not raising finance for your feature film. And the 10th and final reason why you're not raising finance for your feature film is that you haven't given yourself enough time. So it's common for filmmakers, and as a producer, I've done it myself as well, to be extremely ambitious when it comes to a timeline for raising finance for your film. What I've learned is unless you're self-financing the film, it's extremely difficult to raise finance or a decent amount of finance in a really short period of time. So what's important to do when you start to raise bigger budgets, when you start to raise some serious finance for your film, is to give yourself the time that's necessary to do so. Now, that's different for every project, but if you're starting from scratch and you've never raised finance before, and you want to raise a serious amount of finance, so when I say serious, actually, it's even if you just want to raise outside finance, so finance that is not you self-financing the film. If you're only giving yourself a month to do that, or 2 months, or even 3 months to do that, it's just not enough time. Because firstly, you need to learn everything that I've just been through in this video. Next, you need to get all the materials, all the processes, all the systems in place before you even start going out there and pitching it. And then you need to start generating leads, taking meetings, and getting finance, not getting finance. And that takes time. And doing that at scale takes even longer. And so the final reason why you're likely not raising finance for your film is that you just haven't given yourself enough time to do that. And if you're doing that, then you really need to stand back for a second and look at everything from a really, detached point of view, and just say, okay, I know I want to do this quickly. I know I'm ambitious, but am I giving myself enough time to execute this? And am I giving myself enough time to reach out to a really high number of potential investors to finance this film? And so if you're not giving yourself enough time to do those things, it could be the final reason why you're not raising finance for your feature film. Okay, so that's it for this video. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and jump into the comments and let me know if there are any reasons why you're not raising finance for your feature film. I'd love to hear about what those reasons are. And of course, I'd love to see if I can actually help you overcome some of the obstacles that you're facing when it comes to financing your feature film. Now, I do want to tell you about our Producing Accelerator program that helps filmmakers consistently finance and produce their feature films. The way that we do that is really by teaching filmmakers a lot of the things that I've been through in this very video, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And we show them the system that we use to finance our feature films, and we help them implement that in their projects, and then we mentor and guide them as they go out there and start trying to raise finance for their films. So if you want to learn more about that program, head to the link in the description below. You can learn more about our system, and you can also set up a time to speak with either me or a member of my team, and we'll be working out exactly where you're at with your project, where you need to get to, and whether we can help. If we can help, we'll invite you to work with us through the accelerator, and we'll be focused on helping you finance and produce your feature films. And as always, check out these videos next on how to up your filmmaking game.